everyone. Welcome to a special edition of the SBK Betting Podcast. We've had a Cheltenham special for the championship races, and now we have a Cheltenham anti-post special for the 4 Novice Chases. Earlier this week, we got initial entries for these 4 key races, and as expected, a lot of double entries, a lot of Willie Mullins bingo to play. But in general, it gives us a bit of a feeling of what we've got to look forward to in less than 2 months' time. There are a few horses that we know have a well-trodden path to a specific race, and we hope that what we see now is going to be around about what we possibly could see heading into March. But it is very open at this stage, but we do have some good prices for horses that Tom Collins and Ross Miller, who join me now, would like to take at this stage. Hopefully, we have made it very clear that we don't necessarily feel like we need to throw out a horse if there's nothing that's coming out to us. And also with the fact that so many double entries, it's not compulsory to have a selection at this stage. But we'll start with the Arkle. Obviously, this is the Novice Chase for the shortest of distance, over 2 miles, and a race which I think is always, I find, the most interesting because it's tends to be the one that's most obvious from the get-go who you're going to see based on what they did last season as a novice. And all along, John Bon has been one that has been touted by connections and the racing public as a prime Arkle candidate. And he's done nothing wrong so far, and he's the current 11-8 market leader. And then beyond that, it's Willie Mullins, whoever you want. Dysert Dynamo, Appreciate It, El Fabiolo, San Ra, and Sir Gerhard are all next in the betting. Various prices in there for a string of Willie Mullins horses. Then you've got Banbridge and Fildor, Flamebearer, all from over the other side of the Irish Sea as well, and several of those for Gordon Elliott. Ross, I'll start with you first. Obviously, John Bon has all the credentials. He's got the breeding, being a full brother to Duvan, and this could be ideal for him. But we have seen several Willie Mullins horses, whatever ones they could be, showing themselves to have exactly the same credentials, if not better. Why is John Bon at the top of this market?
Because he's a brilliant jumper. We discussed on the Ultimate Pod the video that had come out of Seven Barrows with him schooling, and we commented on his footwork and how assured he looked, and he's taken that onto the course. He had a high level of ability in terms of his fundamental engine for galloping over hurdles. You throw in more obstacles to jump with a good jumper, they're only going to get better, and he just looks a completely different physical as well. I mean, he's a much bigger, stronger horse. He always looked, I thought last year, like Duvan's little brother. Duvan was a big, strong horse. If someone said to you now, that's Duvan's full brother, you wouldn't quibble it. Whereas I think last year, people would have said, what, Duvan, the big, strong chaser, that's his full brother. He looks the part now. He's been very, very impressive. This issue that was thrown in last year of him getting sort of wound up and too hot has just been non-existent. He lobs away in front. Aidan Coleman clearly loves him, gets on well with him. I think that's useful in a jockey horse partnership. And yeah, he looks the real deal. So it is, to my mind, John Bon versus Mr. Mullins. I'm a big fan of Dysart Dynamo. I was last year. I was excited to see him over fences, with the caveat, let's hope that fences back him off and give him some more respect for his obstacles, which he didn't have last year. And they have. His debut run this year was really impressive, very assured in front of his fences. He too looked more relaxed this year, having looked a bit of a tearaway last year. I think he's a live contender. Interesting when you're playing everyone's favourite racing game, Willie Mullins Bingo, which, someone's got to bring that out as a Christmas stocking filler next year, surely. Dysart Dynamo, San Ra don't have entries in the 2 mile 5 race at Dublin Racing Festival. That would suggest that they're pegged at the moment as out and out 2 milers, speed horses. San Ra was impressive, and he was always held in high regard. I think some lunatic, which might have been me, tipped him each way for the champion hurdle last year. But he was impressive in the county, however many years ago it was. So he's clearly a horse that they rate. So he jumped well as well. I think it's John Bon versus those two. I've been a big fan of Dice at Dynamo from the offset, and I'll stay in his camp. But having advised him at bigger prices, he's now at a price where I'm happy to just sit on my hands.
Okay, yeah, John Bon looking to emulate his brother. Just a quick one, Ross. I know you've touched on this already, but if we go back just to Douvan's win in 2016 of this race, where he beat Sizing John, he had come through a fairly faultless period of time where he was, just given the options and the stepping stones to the Arkle. Do you think what John Bon has done sort of is in that equal? Obviously, Douvan had won a Grade 1 Novice Chase, as has John Bon. They feel not just in their similarities physically, but in what they've achieved at this stage is quite. They match on plenty of areas.
Douvan was probably a slightly more impressive hurdler, but I think John Bon's had a lovely prep for the Arkle. He's had 2 runs already. He's going to hopefully, weather permitting, go to the Kingmaker. As a horse person, that to me is how I would imagine a novice chaser should be prepped. Plenty of experience on the racecourse, around different tracks, already knowing that he can do it around Cheltenham. I think he's had a brilliant prep versus Dice Art Dynamo, who obviously had a bit of a hold up. Willie Mullins was very open about a few of them not showing him what they wanted. He's going to get there with 2 runs to his name at best. So John Bon has twice the experience. That counts for something. But I'm still a big believer in Dice Art Dynamo. I think he's got a huge engine, and I don't think he was completely finished when he came down in the Supreme last year. There's no way in the world he was catching Constitution Hill. I'm not going to have that debate with you, I promise. But given how far John Bon was beaten by Constitution Hill, I wouldn't let anyone tell me that Dice Art Dynamo wouldn't have been there or thereabouts, having been far too keen.
I agree with you. I think this is great. Should John Bon and Dice Art Dynamo both hold up? And the point you've made about the entries to the Dublin Racing Festival at least helps us just a touch with this game of poker that Willie Mullins plays. Tom, does that affect your view of this race? What Willie Mullins throws into it, or do you think John Bon will be hard to beat, whatever Willie throws into this?
I think John Bon will be hard to beat no matter what, and he will be my selection in the race. I'll go into detail into why in a second. I think it's a match, no matter who Willie throws into this race, a match between John Bon and Dice Art Dynamo, the 2 horses that we've been talking about. Both ran in Supreme. They were level when Dice Art fell 2 out. I think John Bon probably would have had the better of Dice Art Dynamo, I have to say, that day, just because of how keen Mullins' horse was early on in the race. Despite the fact that I actually tipped him, watching that race live, I still thought he was cooked. Maybe he would have been, 2 or 3 lengths behind John Bon. So there's not too much between them, but I think John Bon would have stayed up the hill better. The reason why I like John Bon and is not just the fact that he potentially would have beaten him last year in the Supreme, but he's a better jumper than Dice Art Dynamo, in my opinion, despite the fact that Dice Art can clearly ping a few fences. He proved that last time out. John Bon can go in short and he can negotiate from one side to the other without making a mistake. And Dice Art Dynamo hasn't really had the chance to prove that just yet. And also, I think 6-4, 11-8, whatever price John Bon is right now, is a great value bet. For example, let's say John Bon, Dice Art Dynamo, and Sam Ra are the top 3 in the market here. What price John Bon go off? I would say 4-5, maybe 8-11 in this race. Dice Art Dynamo around 9-4 to the 3-1 mark in between there. And so you're getting 11-8 about a horse who, at this stage of his career, looks virtually unbeatable, aside from the fact that he's bumped into Constitution Hill, who's the best jumps horse in training right now. You've also got to bear in mind that when Douvan won this race, I know you've both touched on it, he was coming into the Arkle with a rating of 160. John Bon's got a rating of 159 and has actually outperformed Douvan at this stage in his career on RPRs with an RPR of 164. So there's a lot in favour of John Bon. And one trend that you should also pay notice to is since 1998, there have been 8 horses sent off 6-4 or shorter in the Arkle. All 8 of them have won. And if you're looking at just relatively short price favourites in general, the last horse to lose the Arkle when sent off shorter than 9-4 was Noland back in 2008, who finished a gallant third behind the brilliant Tidal Bay. This race is just generally produces standout performer or performers. We've got two here, but we have, in my opinion, one in John Bon. And given that this race used to be ultra competitive, we used to have, 14, 16, 18 runner fields in the Arkle. The fact that we're now getting smaller fields, less depth in these races, just makes that trend of more importance. Favourites are generally going to have a great chance in the Arkle, and I don't see why we should be taking on John Bon at a good price at 11-8 right now.
Right, that's fair enough. You can see a lot of the stats marry up to the reasons why John Bon should be strong, and that you'd think, being a betting man, that this price will, once we get to the Kingmaker, will shorten up. But that's the same for the Dublin Racing Festival and Dice at Dynamo, which you can get 7-2 at the moment. Appreciate it. We should say, as Ross has said, he's got a couple of entries at the Dublin Racing Festival. We'll get to him because I think he could step up and trip. But I loved what Dice at Dynamo did at Leopardstown. The way that he raced remind me of Underso. The way he raced with such enthusiasm and enjoying himself out in front. He made it impossible for the 3 or 4 horses in behind to even go with him at all. They ran that race ragged, and they weren't bad horses in behind to him, but it didn't matter. He just made it look like a complete demolition job, which it was. So I think John Bon will have quite a tough nut if they both do try and go on. I don't think if Paul Townend ends up on Dice at Dynamo, which he could do if El Fabiola goes and likes of Daryl, about to say Daryl Holland there, Daryl Jacob gets onto El Fabiola, because just use his enthusiasm, use his jump. Maybe it's not as slick and obvious as obvious a natural jumper as John Bon, but he's pretty electric, and just I'll be excited to see them using him, the best of him, and making it a stern test for John Bon. So I'll just take on the guys at this stage in the Arkle, which could be, as we always see year after year, a really decent field lineup, and we've got some proper horses in here this year. Right, we'll move on next to the National Hunt Chase. Always a race that, recent years it's been a pretty controversial since they changed the distance of this race, and obviously it's the race for amateurs as well. And sadly, it's taken a real knocking in terms of the amount of entries and the amount of horses that turn up. I think it was just the 6 that ran in it last year, or was it 8, Ross? I can't remember, but it's definitely halved the numbers over the years. Why is that? And what do you expect numbers wise when we get to the declaration stage this year?
I think what you had when it was the 4 miler was exactly what caused the problem for it to come down to this distance. Is you had a lot of no hopers that Connections hoped would plod into a place or plod into that, or if you could be in the top 6 at Cheltenham. And I think as you've taken it back in distance, it makes it more appealing for those second tier horses that were looking at the Browns, or the RSA was then, to stretch themselves a little bit in stamina. They're not going up quite so much. So I think it's become probably a better race. I think I always used to look at it as one of the handicaps, even though it wasn't. And you sort of had, in my head, had the 3 Novice Chases, and the 4 miler was in a sort of different category, whereas now it's very much thrown into the Novice Chase division. So I think it's becoming a slightly better race with better grade horses. For example, Statler won it last year. He's bang on the radar for the Gold Cup. Of course, you had Native River, who won the 4 miler. So it has thrown up some decent horses, but I think it's getting better in grade. It's not a race I'm keen on at the moment. Gaillard de Ménil, I hold an anti-post slip on him, and as the weeks go past, I'm getting less confident, because I can see him having the old Mullins switcheroo and ending up in the Browns, because I just think surely you run your best staying novice in the better race. And I think the Browns is the better race, and I think Gaillard de Ménil is a better horse than Ramillies. I think Ramillies looks like an out-and-out stayer, and I can see the two switching. So I'm not touching the the Mullins horse at the moment. So an overview of the race for me is Chemical Energy did not impress me one bit with his jumping at Cheltenham last time. I know he went into lots of people's notebooks and was quite the talking horse for a while, but he just didn't impress me with his jumping, and I think he's got mistakes written all over him. Jerry Colombe is interesting, but he's surely only going to run here if the ground is heavy. That looks essential to him. So two that are on the radar, whether they're quite horses I want to part with money anti-post on, is Mr. Coffee, who is a real enigma, but appeared to really enjoy the track and the stamina test that the Kim Muir offered last year. For one reason or another, he's not been seen all that much since, but I just thought this was the sort of test that could suit him. And I couldn't find where, but I'm fairly confident that early in the season, Nicky Henderson had mentioned that the Grand National was the sort of race that might just appeal. So clearly stamina is not a concern. And then the other one is the other Nicky Henderson entry, City Chief, who was a really impressive winner at Hereford on Monday. Momentarily looked in a little bit of trouble going down the back, and then came straight back on the bridle and powered away. The ground was desperate at Hereford. It took plenty of getting over that 3-mile trip. And I liked him as well from a point of view that when he made his Chase debut, he made a really bad mistake behind McFabulous, all but came down. And it didn't seem to knock his confidence in his jumping at all. You know, he got back into contention, jumped pretty well, and then that big effort to get back into contention told, and he sort of dropped away. But I think he's got a good constitution. He's clearly going to stay, and he jumped beautifully at Hereford. He's the sort of horse I wouldn't mind having a spin on, and I'm old now. So those two appeal. Whether they're going to go off an awful lot shorter than they are now, whether you want to tie your money up because they probably both won't run, is a viewer discretion, I suppose. But I thought they're both interesting profiles.
You can get 25-1 for both of them as it stands. Obviously, they both have quite a nice handicap mark. City Chief with 134, Mr. Coffee with 140. Potentially that's why he's not been seen that much, because they're protecting it just a little bit. But I was with you when I saw this entry. I quite liked it, Mr. Coffee, because he is, as you say, an enigma. He got backed in massively for the Kim Muir last year, and he had a torrid time. I think he got caught by loose horses and the likes, but he's a horse that I remember when they kept him hurdling for a season. They always said he's going to be a better chaser, and they just sort of minded him a little bit by the great Authorised, who obviously produced Tiger Roll, who was also part of the roll call that went on to win the Grand National. So maybe they are seeing that as a bit of a route through. He, of course, trained by Gordon Elliott. He's got a nice selection of horses in this race. I think they're possibly TC more obvious Gordon Elliott's horses than Willie's horses. Willie's just thrown in everything else that he's got, but they're not standouts. Obviously, Gaia de Mills at the top of that. But I've got a question mark. I thought the race that he won last time is not a race that I would encourage anyone to watch back again. There were two horrible tragedies in that race, equine tragedies. So I just don't. I think he was probably flattered a little bit, and he was just frustrating last year. But probably will be told wrong when it gets to the race. Obviously, this will be what Patrick Mullins decides to ride. It's always worth following in, but I just think there's probably a bit more value out there for this race. What do you think?
Yeah, I love Statler in this race last year, so I always tend to look for Willie Mullins horses, but I kind of have the same opinion of Gaia de Manil as you. I thought that race fell apart last time. Yes, Three Stripe Life, who was one of the market protagonists, did suffer a really bad fatal fall, unfortunately. And Gaia de Manil just kind of picked up the pieces and won that race. Very frustrating horse, tends to be placed a lot of times. You're getting 6-4 about him right now. I think that's a poor price, unlike John Bon, who's around the same price in the Arkle. Now, I understand why people will like Gaia de Manil, because he's won a Grade 1 Novice Chase now. He's won a Grade 1 Novice Hurdle. He is a proper Grade 1 horse on his day. But my main worry for him is not necessarily that last time out piece of form line, because you can only beat what finishes or what else is in the field, but it's the fact that his only start over something like this distance came in the Irish Grand National last season over 3 mile 5 furlongs, 1 furlong shy of what he'll tackle in the National Hunt Chase. Now, he looked like he was going to win that race for a large part of it. He was sent off 11-2 favourite, weaved his way through the field, loomed up large with 2 fences to go. But after the final fence, he really weakened close to home. Maybe an extra year under his belt, this horse will have strengthened and appreciate the extra distance. But I don't know, if he gets in a battle up the hill, I think stamina might ebb away and therefore he could be vulnerable. I'm backing 3 horses in here right now. This is one of the races where I've actually got a reason why I'm to post opinion. And that's not because I really fancy the 3 horses, but I don't like de Menil's price, and therefore you have to take a value stance against it. Number 1 is Chemical Energy. I respect what Ross says about his jumping, but I don't think it was too bad. I know he wasn't fluent on a few occasions, but he's still a young horse. He's going to improve. And I think a bigger field and a faster early gallop will actually help him get into a rhythm, because that was a really small field. I think just 3 runners, and David Russell was forced to make his own pace up front. This horse had speed to win 2 bumpers and a 2 mile 1 furlong Novice Chase. So he's not short of pace. He's not just a plodder, but he's going to be ideally suited by this step up and trip. He's got lots of stamina as well. And I just loved how he travelled in that race at Cheltenham in October. And the fact that he's won at Cheltenham is also another tick in the box. The other 2 I like, they're both big prices. One is Mr. Coffee, who you've both touched on. And Nicky Henderson did say what you said there, Ross, that they were saving him for the Grand National in time. But he also said, and this was after the Kim Muir last year when he finished second, that they wanted to keep him a novice this year because they wanted to run in the National Hunt Chase. So I think that's a real good pointer. And you're getting, 25 to 1 on him right now. It's a good price. And the other one that catches my eye is Tenzing. He's 33 to 1. There are big negatives with him, and that is 1, he's very inexperienced, and 2, he can't jump. And you kind of need experience and the ability to jump to win this race. His jumping does put me off, so I've only had a couple of quid on him. But he has loads of stamina. He will get this trip all day. He's impressed me with how he's finished off his races, and he's probably well handicapped on his best form. The fact that I know it's not a handicap right now, but he's well capable of running in a handicap right now off his rating. So, yeah, I think Tenzing's the horse that's under the radar. I think Chemical Energy is the obvious one to oppose the favourite if you don't like the price, like me. And Mr. Coffee is definitely the sharp and shrewd option at a double figure price.
Okay, well, I think this is the first for both Championship and Novice podcasts that we all like the same horse. So let's hope. That's great that was the early year plan. And Nicky Henderson does like to stick to a plan. So let's all get on the Mr. Coffee train. On we go to the Brown Advisory Novices Chase. 3 mile half of furlong is this race. And Willie Mullins has pitched Gaia de Menil into this as well. He currently heads the market at 4 to 1. The real whacker, who's been a bit of a story of the whole season, is 11 to 2. He also has a Gold Cup entry. But I was listening to his trainer say today that they're probably heart over head with this one. Hart says that they'll go to the Gold Cup. Head will go to this race as it's probably more of a likely option for the real whacker. Time Hill 7 to 1, remarkable horse really that one. Jerry Clam 8s, James de Burley 10s, Griffin Cottage is 12s. Big prices for lots of them in here. Ross, I'll start with you. 3 mile half a furlong. We know this trip it's designed for horses that could be future Gold Cup prospects. Feel like it lacks a little bit of depth. Doesn't really scream to me at the moment anything out there. I obviously like the real whack and what he's done, but we'll get to that. Is there anything that you've been really taken by that you're happy to stick with at this stage?
No, I think last year we were looking at this race and we were already getting excited for these novices coming into open company for this season. Even if you take on board that some in the open company Gold Cup this year might be getting a bit old in the tooth next year, you can't see any of this current lot really at this stage shaking up the Gold Cup picture for 2024. Time Hill, I think you have to say it was the most remarkable piece of training to win a Grade 1 with him over fences over the Christmas period, because he looked a far from fluent jumper, looked thoroughly disinterested, cheap pieces on, and he looked transformed. Whether that was a deep race, I think most certainly not. Is he up to this sort of grade, and is his jumping going to pass a test on the undulations of Cheltenham versus the flat track at Kempton? I would be very wary of that. He wouldn't be for me on that reason alone. Then you come to the same Willie Mullins bingo problem of who runs here, Ramley's Gaillard de Menil. I think they're both interesting, but you simply can't tie up money, I don't think, on those 2 horses at the moment until you find out which one Patrick has told his dad he'd like to ride in the National Hunt Chase. I think Willie does have a really interesting horse in James de Burley. He was well regarded in France. Came over to Ireland for Willie Mullins to train and was straight away pitched into the champion hurdle where he didn't perform. But I think it was interesting that straight after that, he went to the Punchestown Festival and was jumped up a mile in trip in the Stayers hurdle at Punchestown Festival, where he ran a really big race behind Classical Dream, who was very impressive on that occasion. Form lines with Classical Dream are dangerous things to use because he can run very in and very out, but that was an A-grade Classical Dream, I felt, on that occasion. I thought it was interesting that they went up a mile in trip. There was clearly feedback that whatever had happened in the champion hurdle, he clearly wasn't a top-class speed horse. He was then away from the track, came back at Fairy House, jumped beautifully. He's got a Turner's entry. I think he's got an entry in all three, actually, maybe Arkle, Turner's, and this. Runs in the same colours as Al Fabiolo. So I think he might well go for this. I think his stamina is assured. I don't think it's a strong-looking race. Absolutely none of these would have had any right in their hurdling days running in a champion hurdle or equivalent of. He clearly did. I think he's the highest class horse in the race. He lacks experience. He's clearly been difficult to train, but I thought he was really interesting. And then at a bigger price, and it's a horse that ties in with the real whacker who you mentioned, is Thunder Rock. I try really hard, not always 100% successfully, to not knock jockeys. But I have to say, I thought the ride this horse got from Adrian Heskin the last time was pretty average, I have to say. Not so much in that he was held up off the pace, because that's clearly how they think this horse needs to ride, but he was trailing a horse of Nigel Twiston-Davies called Beauport, who had jumped badly the time before, clearly was still showing that reluctance, inexperience with his jumping, who was drifting right and then jumping left. And it was, to my eye, a veteran of 20 point-to-point rides and 1 second place. It was crying out for him to be switched in either to the horse's right or further to the left, because it was very apparent to me that Thunder Rock's jumping suffered because of it, because he was getting distracted by the horse moving in front of him, because he was looking at the horse in front of him, not the fence in front of him. Now, that's my opinion, for right or for wrong. I'm pretty strong on that. He flew home, running down the real whacker, who had the run of the race and is a beautiful jumper and was given a really good front-running ride. He was beaten 3.5 lengths. He lost way more than that with his jumping on the way round, and he was positioned further back. The real whacker had first run. I don't know what price the real whacker is for this, but Thunder Rock is 33 to 1. Mm-hmm. The real whacker's going to be nowhere near that price. I think he's got to prove he stays 3 miles, but he was flying up the hill over 2.5 miles last time. I don't know whether they'll come here. They might look at handicaps, but at 33 to 1, he was interesting enough for me.
Yeah, he's got a big old mark if they do want to keep to handicaps of 150. But yeah, you make some really good points. I would be surprised if Adrian Heskin wasn't on board, though, being owned by the McNeil family. So you would imagine he still retains the ride, and he'll just sort of rework out how to get the best out of him.
Every jockey, you know, I go back and sometimes watch some of these podcasts and think, what was I thinking tipping that? You know, no matter how good you are at your job, you're never 100% perfect every time. Adrian Heskin has a way of riding. You know, who knows? Maybe he sat at home thinking, oh, you know, I wish I'd done things differently. Maybe he did it that way because he's got a better reason than I can find. I have no issue with him back on board it again. I just think on that day, the ride it received compromised its finishing position.
Or maybe he's beaten by a better horse fair and square anyway. The real whacker is clearly improving, but to your point, would never. I think that point about James de Burley being that the class animal in this race, considering where they pitched him in first time out, which Willie does like to do. He likes to bring these French horses over and just throw them first run into these races, these championship races. Obviously, had that year off, but he's clearly at a high level. So 10 to 1 for James de Burley, I think, is interesting. The real whack has been a bit of a marvel, hasn't he? You know, it's impressive for a team who wouldn't be familiar with Cheltenham Festival runners, Patrick Neville has moved over to the UK from Ireland, and he's really thrived, beating Montmoral, which is no mean feat. You know, we saw John Bon beating Montmoral pretty effortlessly. Montmoral is quite a good yardstick, if anything, and I think that the Royal Wacker deserves his place in a good race. The Gold Cup, possibly a little bit ambitious, but I think from their perspective, they might not ever have a horse in this heart at this stage in their career. So why not give it a go? But it might be the case that they see a good opportunity here in what could be a weak enough of the weakest Novice Chase event. So the Real Wacker for me at 11-2, but some interesting thoughts from Ross. I know that TC, you've left this one, which is completely fair enough, as we move on to a couple of our last race that we're going to look at, which is the Turners. Now this is the race which is the 2.5 mile race. So again, we've got horses that are entered in the Arkle, entered in this, entered also, because some are doubly entered in both the Turners and the Arkle, the Turners and the Brown Advisory. So we still don't really know. But Mighty Potter's 3-1, Appreciate It 5-1, James Burley also in his 7s, El Fabiolo 8s. Sir Gerhard 10-1 in here. A quick word on Sir Gerhard, because who was it? Ross or was it TC?
No, it was me.
It was TC.
Me. Don't.
Just a quick word. Last week you tipped it up for the Stayers. What do you think about him being entered for a Novice Chase next week? Really honestly listened and thought, sorry, mate.
This horse has to run in the Stayers. He's now entered it. What is it, Novice Chase next week or something? I can't believe it. I'm gutted. What I will say is I won't have to do that forfeit for Florian Porter by the looks of things, because it looks like he's going to miss the Cheltenham Festival.
That is harsh. That is harsh. I don't know what you've done. You've gone over to Gavin Cromwell's and you put a stone somewhere. That's not on.
Swings and roundabouts in this game, Jess.
But all things being serious, like, you know, it was predictable really that Sir Gerhard was going to pitch up, and he's been obviously clearly made for chasing. So seeing him entered up for a chase, but you know, it might not go according to plan. TC, he might jump like an absolute dog, and in which case they might switch back, and your case could still be proven. But anyway, let's look at the Turners, and a race that I've really liked through the years, because I think it has produced some really thrilling finishes. We've seen some really good winners of this race. I particularly Appreciate It, hopefully stepping up in trip. TC, how do you view it at this stage? I know you've decided to leave some of the races behind. Why this race? Have you got a selection?
Yeah, just to touch on the Brown Advisory, as you say, I have no selection at this stage. It's just too early for me to be betting in that kind of race, just purely because of the double entries between horses from the National Hunt Chase and the Brown Advisory. You've also got a load of horses that I think will run in the Turners that are also at the top of the market in the Brown Advisory. So for an anti-post punter, my advice for that race would be to leave it. However, just a quick note on that. I know we're going back in time now, but if Ballygriffin Cottage runs in there, he's definitely a horse that I would be interested in. I think I put him up in the Ultimate Jumps pod as a horse to follow this year. Don't know whether he'll run there, so I'm not going to tip him up. But if he is, that would be my tentative selection. The Turners, as you've touched on, I think there is more of a clear idea of who's going to be at the top of the market, and that is Mighty Potter. He deserves to be the favourite after his Drinmore victory over Gaillard de Menil, who we've already touched on and I've had a pretty damning opinion of in the National Hunt Chase. And in third that day was Banbridge. Now, Banbridge is the horse that I'm actually interested in for the Turners from a punting perspective. Reversing the form with Mighty Potter might be difficult. And if you watch that replay, you think, why would you think this horse could actually beat Mighty Potter? Because there was no real evidence on that occasion that Banbridge has the ability to beat Mighty Potter at Cheltenham. However, there are numerous reasons why I think he's the bet. One, you're getting 4 times the price roughly right now on Banbridge, therefore much better value. Secondly, it was his third run in quick succession at Ferryhouse in the Grade 1 Drinmore. Maybe that the quick runs were just taking a bit of a toll and we didn't see a real Banbridge. Maybe he was a little bit flat on the day, because prior to that, he bolted up at Gorham Park, albeit in a much weaker event. And then at Cheltenham's November meeting, I was there that day and I was super impressed with how he jumped. If he was in short, he would get over without making a mistake. He would take off from outside the wings. He was really swift through the air as well. And he just didn't really show that again at Ferryhouse next time. So he is my selection in the race. However, now this comes with a caveat. if he runs at the DRF next month, and I know he's entered in one of the races, I think, is it the Irish Arkle? I'm not sure. It's one of the races that he's entered in. I would be less keen on Banbridge, purely because I think he goes best when fresh. He's been off for some time now since his last run in the Drimmore, but I want to see him go to Cheltenham fresh off a longer absence. He's 2 from 2 at Cheltenham, has won, I think, his last 3 times after a layoff. So if he does run in the DRF, maybe I'm not as keen on Banbridge as I am right now. But at this point in time, he would definitely be my anti-post play in the Turners.
Yeah, he went to the Martin Pipe last year, fresh enough. He had ran in January and then went straight in March. As you say, he is in that Arkle Novice's Chase, but as is a frightening amount of horses. Well, not amount of horses, a frightening selection of horses from Willie Mullins, who they will be, you don't know, maybe Joseph O'Brien will wait and see at declaration time. Obviously that Dublin Racing Festival coming out the first weekend of February. So I would encourage everyone to keep an eye on that as a good marker and pinpoint to what's going to turn up where. Okay, Ross, I mean, I was looking, I've always thought this has been another good addition to obviously a great addition to the Novice Chase lineup, but you just look at some of the winners of this race, the likes of Bob Ollinger, Chantry House, Sam Crow, and that win of Sam Crow's was one of the races of a brilliant spectacle to watch, but it's lacked the quality of horses going forward, hasn't it? But I think if Appreciate could be in here, he could be that one that could have that sort of star quality, and you just get the sense that he's just improving and improving, and he's obviously got the great Cheltenham festival record itself as well.
Yeah, given how keen I was on Galopin de Champs last year, it won't surprise you to know that I haven't watched back Bob Ollinger's win last year. But yeah, I agree. When you look at it that way, you look at it and think, this is one of the few races that's been added to the festival that's been a good initiative. And then you look at it and say, but actually, what has it really, really thrown up? I like it, and I think you can perhaps lose some horses from the system when they're forced to go over 3 miles over fences before they're perhaps fully mature for it, and they're not quick enough for the 2 miles. Now, perhaps the onus is on connections to just not go to the Cheltenham Festival, which would be a kind of revolutionary idea. But this race is here. I agree with you. A little bit like James de Burley. Appreciate it. They were really excited, and I love the phrase they used last year when Honeysuckle won at Christmas, and Paul Townend said, "Yeah, but I can't wait to have a go on the big horse." It just, to me, said that this horse is really revered in the yard and held in high regard. They went to the Champion Hurdle without a prep run. Clearly, they think he's a really useful animal. He's a big, strong, strapping horse. He's looked a solid jumper. He doesn't look the sharpest, I don't think. And I just would worry about him in the Arkle, and I could see him coming to the Turners, because, as we discussed earlier, he's one of the few horses that has an entry in the 2 mile and the 2 mile 5 race at the Dublin Racing Festival. I'd like to see him here. I think his solid jumping and his unrelenting galloping style would just suit this down to the ground. So I like him a lot. The other horse I like is Banbridge. I'm in a complete agreement with TC. Just, you can put a line through the form of that last run as far as he's concerned. He just, from the offset, looked nowhere near the free-going, exuberant jumping horse that had won at Cheltenham earlier in the season. I'm not a fan of Mighty Potter. I think the form of beating Gaillard de Menil over 2 mile 4, who is a slow old boat essentially, by 4 lengths is just nowhere near good enough to win this if the potential of some of these horses comes through. So for me, the two I'm keen on are Appreciate It and Banbridge. I'd be very surprised if Appreciate It goes to the Arkle. I think there's probably 2 or 3 in the yard that would go to the Arkle before he does. So I'd be pretty happy with his price at the moment. Banbridge, I just think if Banbridge runs in the Arkle, my concern would be not that he won't run here, will be that I don't think Joseph O'Brien, I mean, he's a really shrewd operator and has got a big team of race planners. If they run in the Arkle, surely they don't think he's good enough to win an Irish Arkle. therefore are they looking to get another couple of pound off his mark and go to a handicap like they did last year? That would be my concern with him. If he runs in the Irish Arkle, I'd be surprised if he comes to a graded race at Cheltenham. I think they might look to exploit a handicap mark.
Okay, interesting thoughts there. Banbridge, both TC and Ross are keen on him. His chances at this stage at 12-1, which is a good price. Appreciate it at 5-1 right now. I think that's a really nice price for a horse that could be a hell of a lot shorter, especially if they do go down that 2.5 mile route at the Dublin Racing Festival. And I was just hearing words from Patrick Mullins earlier today that they consider him the most talented of the novice chasers in the yard at the moment, which is saying a lot for a team extremely long in that division. So appreciate it. 5-1, both Ross and I are keen on him, and as I said, Banbridge for TC and Ross. But I think overwhelmingly it's nice to hear that we found a nice juicy price selection in the shape of Mr. Coffee, all three of us. We promised there was no conferring beforehand, so that's of note as we end out this special edition of the SBK Betting Podcast, a look at the anti-post picture as it stands in the middle of January ahead of the 4 key novice chases. Of course, when it gets closer to the time, we'll be having a closer inspection at all the races as we did last year, but we'll be getting as close to the off as possible, with declaration stage always being 48 hours before, but hopefully we'll have a clearer picture of what's going on by then. Every day something changes, and obviously this time last week I sat here tipping up Long Press as my Gold Cup tip, and he is out, and as is my other anti-post post tip. We think 50-50 Flooring Porter, so a lot can happen in the week of jump racing. So let's see where we get to in about 6 weeks time, and hope we'll come back and review where we are at. And it'll be interesting to see the prices of some of our horses that we have selected at this anti-post stage compared to where they might be in the early March. So good luck. Enjoy this period as we get closer to the big Cheltenham Festival. A reminder, as always, that new SBK customers can get £30 in free bets by betting £10. T's and C's always apply. If you're listening to us for the first time, we have a weekly podcast where we look ahead and preview the action that is coming over the next couple of days of the weekend. So make sure to come back and tune in on whatever podcast channel or YouTube channel or on the YouTube channel. But for now, many thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.